Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 4 of the OMNIA Performance Podcast. I'm Fergus Crawley.
I'm Johnny Payne.
And we are OMNIA Performance. That felt slick, like a corporate ad.
We should probably learn to say, and we are OMNIA Performance at the same time.
In sync, yeah. No, we'll work on that. Expect that next time in episode 5, ladies and gentlemen. We'll definitely forget and not do it, but nonetheless. We are going to debrief the Dinnie Stones for you all today. But before we do that, we have a couple of things to request from you, which is for you to follow or subscribe on whatever platform you are listening or watching on, to rate and review the show on whatever platform you are listening on, and make sure that you drop a comment on YouTube. Basically, do all the things on whatever platform we are listening on, as it will make us very happy and make us smile like this. So if you're not watching, you have the option to go and watch that on YouTube, if your ears are burning so much to know what us smiling on camera looks like, because we are sure you are probably considering at this point. But nonetheless, I'm going off in a strange direction before we even began, and we are going to get straight into a bit of context on the Dinnie Stones. Yeah, reel it right back in. So this is the placard that is up by the Dinnie Stones on the Belogie estate in Potarch in Aberdeenshire. The bottom line here is that these are some heavy rocks based up in the sort of northeast of Scotland, and this is a real exciting narrative for us at the time that really paints a picture of what the Stones are, the heritage behind them, and the narrative of Donald Dinnie himself. And this is actually information that isn't as readily available like this online as it is in person, so I'm just going to read the whole thing, so bear with me. We're going to start from the top. Donald Dinnie was born at Balnacraig in the parish of Aboyne in 1837. He was the son of a local stonemason and followed his father into the profession. At the age of 16, he took part in a local strongman competition in Kincardine O'Neill, winning a total of £1 in prize money. Baller. Donald Dinnie continued to work as a stonemason in the local area. However, now with a passion for training and competition, he continued to devote as much free time as possible to travelling and competing in Highland Games across Scotland. In 1860, Donald cemented his place in local and international history at Potarch by carrying 2 stones with a combined weight of 775 pounds across the width of Potarch Bridge and back again, approximately 4.6 metres, which doesn't sound like much. But having picked them up, we can confirm that feels like an eternity, which is not a measure of distance, but I'm going to stick with it for sort of
illustrative purposes.
Dramatic effect. The stones had been fitted with iron rings and used to support scaffolding in the 1830s when repair work had to be carried out on the Thomas Telford Design Bridge. In 1870, he became a full-time athlete, travelling to both America and Canada to compete. He travelled extensively over his lifetime and competed in New Zealand and toured Australia, competing for 14 years. He left Sydney in April 1897 and finally docked in Tilbury, Essex in October 1898, having spent about a year promoting Highland Games and concerts in South Africa. His daughter Eva and son Edwin featured in many of these presentations. His athletic career spanned 50 years and he won 11,000 competitions. Our sheer disbelief at that number will be something that we'll cover in a second, but for the time being, wow. During this time, a simply outstanding achievement. On his return to Scotland, he performed until 1912 in local music halls and continued to take part in Highland Games, either as a veteran competitor or as a judge. Donald Dinnie died in London in 1916. He was 78 years old. In 1963, the media interest in the Dinnie Stones was renewed when David Prowse, MBE, the British heavyweight weightlifting champion, lifted both stones simultaneously with the aid of hand straps. Wet wipe.
We'll cover off who David Prowse is for the uninitiated.
I feel intimidated existentially having said that now. Dave Prowse went on to become an actor and played the infamous Darth Vader in Star Wars. So I take that back, Dave Prowse and the spirit of Darth Vader. Please don't. Red lightsaber me. In 2002, Donald Dinnie was indicted into the Scottish Sports Hall of Fame in Edinburgh, and many of his remaining medals can be seen in Aberdeen Art Gallery if you ever find yourself, unfortunately, in Aberdeen. That's not what the placard says. That's my
that's your own personal.
That's my personal attack there. Since the stones were rediscovered by Mr. Well, mind you, Aberdeen is basically made of big grey stones, isn't it? So this is it's very fitting. Since the stones were rediscovered by Mr. David Webster, OBE, in 1951, there have been many attempts to emulate Donald Dinnie's achievement. The first recorded unassisted lift of the stones was by Jack Shanks in 1972. The Dinnie Stones are kept outside the cafe at Potarch, but each year they are moved to the green at Aboyne for the Highland Games. It has always been important to Belogie Estate that the stones should be viewed and admired by all who have an interest in them, and we are deeply respectful of their cultural heritage. And so are we. So
let's break down a couple of things in there. Even as you're reading it, I know I read it when we were up north, but even as you're reading it, there's a couple of great parts to that strike me as fun as much as anything. So Donald Dinnie's, he's a stonemason, right?
Yeah.
So he's already, I've fought a couple of stonemasons, and they're extraordinarily hard to fight. So a tough guy by any measure. And this bridge is obviously being repaired, and they've used this bridge, these great big stones, put a couple of great big iron rings in there, and used them to counterbalance.
The sheer actual practicality of that, I'm still
Even
unaware
that in
of.
itself, you kind of think that's mad. But they're obviously hanging on some kind of pole, which is pulling some kind of counterweight and allowing the build or the rebuild of that particular bridge. And he, at some point, has obviously seen them, maybe when they've been finished in that particular use, they've been put back down to the ground and thought, wonder if I can lift them.
Yeah, we should probably get rid of these.
Yeah, and he's obviously managed it. And then obviously thought, well, carrying him about would be a good crack and all the rest of it. So just a hard, strong man, somebody who enjoys strong things. That doesn't, that in itself sounds like just a lot of fun. And he's done that, and I'm not sure whether or not the timelines in the story there are correct or not. I'm sure they are, or whether I'm interpreting them correctly or not. But he's obviously done that and realised when other people have looked at what he's doing, Donald, how the hell are you doing that? That's insane.
Maybe I'm quite strong.
Like, maybe I can go. Maybe I'll attend the local Highland Games here in Aboyne, or I'm not sure the timeline's there either. And from there, forged a career in strength training. And strength.
£1 later.
Yeah, £1 later. That's obviously set him up for a couple of years, and gone on from there to become what is essentially a Scottish legend. And
it's a worldwide legend in strongman. I'm not going to sit here and pretend it is world renowned in all these spaces, but in strongman it is a well-known,
absolutely
well-placed feat of strength. In Scotland, it has all the heritage attached to it as well. So your average punter up in Aberdeenshire might know about them, whereas Deirdre and Marjorie from Kent probably won't, unless their husband competes in strongman. In which case, or they compete in strongman, to be perfectly fair, but I've never met anyone from Kent called Deirdre or Marjorie that does. So
might well do.
It might well do.
But you're looking at, or we were looking at, for a long time each, these stones as being part of a kind of a small, like you say, a kind of a niche culture, if you like, but certainly within that culture, a huge kind of goal, a huge bullseye somewhere. And you look at people that have done it, you understand that people are doing it. There's kind of a yearly tribute to them at the Highland Games.
And the Gathering as well.
And now Rogue have a kind of a replica pair. We'll maybe talk about them later on. And at the Arnold Classic, these are lifted now. So again, they're gaining more and more popularity in that sense. And that's where we were, essentially. That's what we were there to do. And it's been on our radars cumulatively, I suppose, for 30 years total, if you break it down how much we've both wanted to do this for a long time.
So I first heard about them when I was 15 or 16, which was just when I started lifting. I can't remember where it came up. I think it was before the Stoneland documentary by Rogue, because that's where they really came into play, obviously.
Yeah, that was a huge
But
boost.
it was some meathead at the gym that was just talking about them, and I just overheard it and thought, oh, that's cool. Looked them up on a very rudimentary website and thought, that's really cool. I'll never be able to do that. And then put it to the back of my mind. And then, to be honest, I really had put it to the back of my mind until February-ish. I put up online that I was actually struggling a little bit in terms of feeling a bit burnt out, feeling a bit lost and lackluster, because I'd completed 660 in December and my strength just felt a little bit arbitrary and in the way of the Keltman prep that I was working through. And I don't do well without goals, so I thought, right, what can I do strength-wise that's going to keep me fascinated, engaged in strength training? I thought, well, you're not going to get any stronger on your squats. You just bench 140. The next milestone's really 4 plates, which is just never going to happen unless I become an absolute pie man and weigh a lot more. But deadlifts, it gets in the way too much to be able to really, really work hard on my deadlift and get it up back towards the 600-pound mark. And then I thought, oh my God, the Dinnie Stones. I wonder if there's a way I can manipulate my leverages to be able to give these a crack. They weigh 332 kilos. So you hear that number and you think, wow. No way.
0.46.
Pedant. He didn't even know the timelines, and he's sitting here correcting me on that. I knew all the timelines the whole time.
I probably had to ask you about 4 times that day. What do these weigh again?
Quickly.
Wrong for me to be a pedant, to be fair.
So you go into it. First step was ordering a pair of replica handles. There's a few places you can get them online. I just got the one that had the fastest delivery because I was amped up and ready to go because I finally had a bit of a goal again, strength-wise. So I gave them a bash and immediately thought, wow, this is awkward. Nailed my shin off some calibrated plates. Felt like a proper tail whip effect from a scooter when you were 12 years old and just crying on the floor, Peter Griffining, just... and then worked my way up to 267 on day one, I think. But interestingly, in that process, we'll talk on this because it actually becomes quite relevant for you later on, went from lifting them the conventional way, which is basically big stone forward, and your opposing foot is in line with that stone, little stone back, and then the opposing foot to that is back. So you almost form a sort of square with your hands and feet of sorts, rectangle, if we're being pedants, which apparently we are today.
Yeah, sure. Let's do that.
I then just felt a bit uncomfortable, felt like I was getting pulled in certain directions, so the sumo cheater in me decided to go the other way and have my left foot forward with the front stone and my back foot back, funnily enough, with the smaller stone. So I almost go cack-handed with my feet. Cack-footed isn't a phrase, but you know what I mean. And it just felt more natural. So I started working there, worked up to 267 on day one, and then the following week just basically built up week by week up until I did the full weight for one, and then worked up to the full weight for a triple, and then actually worked up to 350 and went unconscious. So win some, lose some. Yeah, it's a bit of a different take on Wendler's 531. Wendler's 5-3 blackout is coming soon. But the premise was pretty simple, and the awkwardness of them was something that I really had to get to grips with. And again, I think you were in the same headspace, weren't you, where you've had it in the front, not in the front of mind, back of mind for a long time. And I think me getting the pins and actually giving the opportunity meant, right, it's an unfathomable amount of weight, isn't it? But having a go and learning to feel it.
You getting the pins, it was interesting because the Dinnies have been, like I said, on my radar. I got lost in probably how old I am when I say these kind of things. But if I think 25 years, maybe even 30, it's one of those things, have come from the very north, I've got friends that live around that area and things that I can't remember really when I became aware of them. It feels like I've always known what the Dinnie Stones are. And there's been obviously a certain point where I've really got into lifting and really got into kind of working on strength and really kind of got into the world that we're in now, in whatever guise that I've thought one day I'd like to lift them. But as I've said recently in stories and things on Instagram or whatever, for me, with the amount of injuries and things that I've had, and being relatively small, much smaller back when I was fighting at 65 kilos. So to think about lifting them back then was just sort of absurd. But it was something that you know, in an almost sort of schoolboy superhero kind of way, it just seemed like such a brilliant thing to see people do and to understand that they were doing it, and just this kind of brutal lift.
The Highland Games have real poetry about them, don't they? And that's what's encapsulated with these for me. It's hard to explain. It's just the storytelling, their heritage, the fact that people have tried and failed, the fact you've got to travel to them, they go where they don't, you can't mimic it elsewhere.
When we grew up, there weren't a lot of gyms and things either, so we would be, you know, holidays for us was camping and stuff, and if we did anything like with the scouts or whatever, there'd be quite often the parents, I suppose, or the leaders, the adults, they'd have a few beers and they'd find a great big stone to see if they could get it over their head, and it was whoever, oh right, let's find another one because such and such has got it over his, or they use a great big water, you know, like a 16-gallon, and see who could press it overhead as many times. So it's not strength training per se, but it's like, who's the strongest? Let's have a laugh, you know, which is very Scottish. It's pure
masculine fascination. Can I lift this?
Can I lift it? I wonder if you can lift that. I bet you can. You know, and exactly that. And if you think about the stone lifting in Scotland and all over, I think wherever it exists, Scandinavia, some Basque country stone lifting, etc. It's all sort of manhood rites of passage to a certain degree, or argument settlements, so that you keep your clan without chopping each other's head off over who owns which particular sheep. You think, right, if you need to argue this out, Jock and Tam, you're going to have to do.
It's literally
see who can lift that stone.
My dad a battle your dad, isn't it?
Yeah. So this thing's always been in my mind. But like you say, when you got the stone, got the pins. You know, I think we talked about it briefly, but then you did what you do quite well.
That number seems too high, doesn't it?
Well, I'll get the pins. As soon as you got the pins, I thought, no, there's no way after all this time me thinking about them, that Fergus is going to go out there and do these stones without me at least having a little bit of a pop at it. But still, even back then, if we look at the training or lack thereof that I managed just time-wise, because I kind of settled into, yes, I'm going to try it, didn't I? A matter of weeks out. And then what happened? I think I got a horrendous cold. Or something that almost derailed. Something excusey, yeah. It seems like I don't think this is
my executive summary is you were ill, to confirm he was ill, and then he went to pull some ivy off the wall and it pinged back and pulled his lat out.
That's right, yeah, that was the day before. But there was also, I had potentially some work that I was going to go to America. So on the day that we had booked in to lift him, I may not have been there. So I kind of switched off momentarily from it. But as soon as we thought, no, that's not going to happen, I am going to be around full kind of pelt. We went for it,
So we'll just break down the training a little bit because I think that's what people will be interested to hear. But we'll go back to our fascination with these in a roundabout way to summarise a little bit. But training-wise, the bottom line was it is a hinging movement. It is a very, very awkward hinging movement. The pins replicate it up to a certain point, and we've been told and read online. And Brett, who looks after the stones up there from a sort of strongman perspective, they don't belong to him. He does have his own stones, but Brett sort of curates them. He says, and the general consensus, if you can pull 300 kilos plus with the pins, you should be able to get the stones off the floor due to the nature of how they sit on the floor and the way that you can kind of manipulate the angle of the weight off the floor due to the fact they are stones and not calibrated plates on the floor. So there's a surface area consideration, but the best way that I can describe the difference before we go into the actual training breakdown is, honestly, it's like bumper plates versus calibrated plates. That's how it felt. I felt like I was being pulled apart by the actual stones rather than it. So it felt like a much wider.
Oh, it definitely was. Yeah,
I don't know, like almost a wider tension point rather than the calibrated plates felt narrower, but the tension build and the sort of stress going through me systemically was way higher. But when I started pulling, I was like, oh, I'm getting split in half here. What's going on? And then they came up. I was like, oh, well, happy days. There we go. But training-wise, you can't mimic the stones because they are the stones. That's the whole point of them. But my logic was basically work up to a heavy single to get a feeling from them, which was 267 for me. That felt awkward. And then I went in the following week and did 287. And then from there, I did a 3x5, 3x3, 2x1, and then a max rep set at the full weight, and then 350. And then some easy singles, and then I went in. And that was just replacing my deadlifts on Mondays as my heaviest lower body day, and then I did some light squats afterwards. Funnily enough, for me, there was definitely a bit of an upper back injury that I had to deal with. It wasn't an injury, it was just a bit of a niggle that was stopping me from squatting.
And your hamstring.
And my hamstring,
off the bike and your hamstring as well.
So the awkwardness and the angle of the position, the twisty-turny, trying to maintain bracing whilst you're getting pulled against a completely non-predictable angle did really take its toll on me around other things. So I wanted to get them out of the way, to be perfectly honest, because it was adding a lot of stress that was difficult to go with. And the thought of going into a session, picking up 300 kilos over and over again, whilst, it doesn't act exactly like a deadlift, but it's all down to your unique leverages, really, because Brett was telling us he's had 340 kilo deadlifters that can't pick them up.
Can't move them, yeah.
And at the moment, I can deadlift 250, maybe 260 if I pulled it properly off the floor.
Well,
so
I'm a reasonable example of that. In the stones on the day came up, I would never be as rude or as egotistical to say easily. They came up easier than I thought they would, but it was still horrendously difficult.
They came up?
Yeah, they came up, yeah. But I think I've got a 225 deadlift, maybe. Certainly if we tested it might be a little tiny bit more. But the point being is that deadlift, I've been asked a few times, I'm sure you have, what do I need my deadlift to get to before I'll be able to lift the Dinnie Stones? And the answer is that I wouldn't worry about your deadlift so much as actually practicing with that kind of movement, because it was so unique and such an odd. Our foot placement was different, mostly probably because of different biomechanics, different shapes, and all that kind of stuff.
You adopted my foot positioning, didn't you?
Yeah.
Apologies. Because you were trying it one way, and it was pulling you. It was rotating you once the stones came off once the pins came off the floor. And then I can't remember what session it was, but you just tried it my way to see, didn't you? And then we just changed your front foot a little bit and it stopped that turniness, which allowed you to basically unlocked your leverage potential, which is your back. Whereas for me, what it does, and the reason I find it so much easier than I do deadlifting, is because it takes my lower back out of the equation. My lower back is the weakest link in my chain by miles. So it made it upper back, glutes, hamstrings, and quads, which is my bag. That's my thing. So being able to do that, and then they came up. The flip side of that is that because of all the injuries, especially, I don't squat much, can't, so I was concerned about having been able to lift them at all. But once I was able to find that positioning, I was able to then draw scaps back and use my back. It's just practice then, isn't it?
So for you used legs and drove them up in a kind of a hinging manner, whereas I got myself over them, used back for the most part, and kind of stood up. I don't think either way is correct. It's just sort of interesting to find
that's the funny thing.
Through
isn't it?
That process, we both found different methods to do the very same job, and were successful. So
The bottom line, I think, is exactly as you just touched upon there. We are not going to sit here and say this is how you train for and execute the Dinnie Stones, because it was different for me as it was for you, and I can imagine it'll be different for the next person. So practice, so the pins, playing around with foot placement, playing around with leverages, and playing around with your positioning is all that we'd recommend, and then working through some sort of linear periodization, because that's all we did. And even for you, it was a bit YOLO swag mode. Let's fit it in when we can. 4 sessions in, and you managed to get them off the floor. So,
well, yeah. And again, you can speak to the leverage and finding that position and being able to practice as being what was successful. I mean, clearly I didn't get, well, the first time I lifted them, it was like 180, 200 kilos. Like, these aren't coming up. This is just patently ridiculous that I'm even associating myself with this idea. Second time was 250. Well, that's a massive leap that couldn't possibly be strength gains, you know. Third time around 300, fourth time around we got 317 up, and then the next go I had was lifting the Dinnie Stones, you know. So clearly there was strength and capability there, but what it was just efficiency of movement and actually practicing how to get myself in the right position, which we adjusted every time. Your eyes on, we were able to say, well, your foot wasn't in the right place. We videoed some of it, you know, and I think that's the key, isn't it? Is having a second pair of eyes, or if you don't have that luxury, film that kind of stuff and really get. And actually, there's people all over who have lifted them who you could probably send footage to them. I know that. Please don't think I'm suggesting you do this, but I know that Brett and others up there who are close to the Stones have given out advice to people who are traveling a long way. Say, listen, you're going to have to lift them this way. There are certain hard and fast rules there.
Yep. Yeah,
and the rest of it's down to individual adjustment.
The main consideration as well is
you're not going to conventionally deadlift them. You know?
No. And even things like Brett rightly brought up the rogue grip, because he says they're nothing really like the Stones, having lifted them as well. He says they're much more flat bottomed. They don't perform the same way as the Stones, and the height, they're about 2 inches higher. So if, for example, you manage to pull the rogue replicas, which I think go around the Rogue Invitationals, you can have a go at some points. There's a big consideration in terms of how you manipulate your leverages to be able to actually get them off the floor, because if you're super wide stance with short arms and you can get those ones an inch off the floor, the Dinnies aren't going to leave the floor. So these are all considerations that we don't really need to deep dive on, because the bottom line is, if you want to do them, get yourself some pins, practice, but be aware of the fact that you'll need to scale back volume, because they are very, very new in terms of the movement patterns that you're working through. It's a completely unnatural movement pattern. But that is the beauty of this. This is the most functional lift I have ever done, whatever that word means. But I think that this is significantly more functional in my mind than a clean and jerk is, as it is a pair of rocks that were used to counterweight some scaffolding being picked up off the floor.
If you can move them, lift them, hold them, you just lift them.
But with that,
a true deadlift.
A true, yes. So this is a deadlift in the wild, shall we say. But the bottom line is they're very demanding. So if you do want to give them a go, there's several ways to skin this proverbial cat, but getting yourself a pair of pins or Jefferson deadlifts, or just trying different ways to feel that position and then manipulate it. Because for me, I did 257 for 4 singles as my last session beforehand. Mm-hmm. Remember the first 2, I fell over. My positioning was all wrong. So even with all that practice, I started to panic a little bit, thinking, I thought by this point I'd have my head in gear, I'd know what I needed to do, and I'd know how I could set up to get this nailed. And then I was falling over my first 2 reps, like, this is 80 kilos less than the full weight. What's going on, Fergus? But then the next 2 reps, once I built the tension and got my positioning right, sort of tension through the floor, through my feet in the right places, everything was gravy, and we were fine. So it was a really fantastic experience in terms of feeling that fear up until it, and I think that's something that we really want to deep dive on now a little bit, isn't it? Because I went into it very confidently, having pulled 350, and Brett looked at me when I said I pulled 350, and he went, "Aye, fucking no bother." Yeah. And then, sorry, Brett, if you're listening to that, that's just my general Scottish passionate man voice rather than you specifically, but nonetheless, you didn't feel so, you didn't have as much time under the pins as I did, did you?
No, like we said, I'd only had 4 sessions training them. I'd only ever gotten 317 up. And although, as you said earlier on, we'd been told, you know, if you can get 300 on the pins, the chances of the Dinnies coming up are pretty high. So I had been beyond that 300, but I just didn't believe that. Psychologically,
it's hard, isn't it? It's hard,
I couldn't get my head in a place to think these weigh 333, just under. So I have a deficit in strength. There's no way that these will come up, you know. And I got in my own head a little bit. To the point at which the other people were lifting them. That was interesting to us after we discussed this just a couple of days ago, didn't we? But other people were turning and lifting with the heaviest stone at the back, or trying to at least put the heaviest stone in their strongest arm, which for me would have been my right hand, which meant I would have been lifting the opposite way around we'd been trained. or we had trained them. And even 5 minutes before we were likely to lift him, I was saying, shall we switch around? Shall I turn around and lift him the other way?
I almost, when he said that, I didn't take you seriously. I thought you were kind of joking because like,
No,
what a ridiculous suggestion at this stage. But you had got inside your own head, hadn't you?
Oh, very much so, very much so. And the reasons, two or three reasons being, right back to the very beginning of this conversation. One, the Dinnies had been such a huge thing in my mind. I really, really wanted to lift them. And I just didn't believe I could on the day. I thought, there's no way I'm going to be able to lift these. So I got in my head and thought, I'm going to bump it. I'm probably going to have to rely on the fact that Fergus and I have a good enough relationship for me to just say, I'm just not going to try. And that was something that was really bothering me. How do I say it without interfering with his process? Shall I let him lift his lift? But we did it kind of straight after each other. It was consecutive. Right, yeah. You go, then you go. Shall I let him do his lift and then say, listen, I'm not going to bother, well done? Or shall I tell him beforehand and then now he's got another thing to concern himself with? So I had thought that we would get your lift out of the way. And we got right up to the point, I'm not sure if you're even aware of this, but we got right up to the point. There was 4 lifters there on the day. And we decided arbitrarily decided on an order. I think I was lingering in the background.
There was pressure being applied. I don't know whether
I think it was just time. Yeah,
I think just wanted to crack on.
Stop warming up.
With your silly pins and weights that you brought from Edinburgh.
Yeah. Get on this. Right, who's going first? You said you were going to go first, and everybody else jumped in. I was being shy and certainly coy in the fact that I was already thinking to myself, I'm not even going to bother trying here. This is ridiculous. So I decided to go fourth, and what we ended up with was, the chap that was going to go third, he was, I think he was left-handed or something. He needed the stones switched around the other way. So Brett decided, he said, well, which way do you lift them, Johnny? And I lifted them the same way as you did, and the second chap. All right, you go now then. And because all of a sudden I didn't have the opportunity to go, lads, I'm just bowing out.
He was brilliant there, wasn't it, at guiding people through it? Yeah, he
just gave me no choice. I kind of went, oh shit, right, all right then. And I come up, put my hands on them and lifted them. So it was kind of that moment where, oh, you're not fourth, everything's gone, right, just lift them, don't be a prick. Lifted them up. Oh, they came up.
The haze cleared almost, wasn't it?
Yeah, it did. It was it was basically because of that little timeline difference in how long I felt I had to work up to giving up. It got taken away from me, and I just had to do it, which was bloody good in the end because I did do it. But
you did it twice.
Yeah, I did it twice.
Second time was for a picture, and here he was worried he wasn't going to get them up.
It was interesting though, because that's the first time in many years. Probably the last time I competed was jiu-jitsu, and that would have been a good year or so before lockdown. So 3 years, I think, at least. And
2019.
I'd forgotten the process of how far into my own head I can get, and how far anybody gets into their own head, and just what goes through it. And forgot that I had those kind of little demons that I usually am aware of, but this time I was like, oh shit, right, forget it. So anyway, long story short, I shit it, but moved anyway.
Well, that's the bottom line, isn't it? It just goes to show, funnily enough, it's exactly what we talked about in that very seat on the Modern Mind podcast, and I had a inkling of that fear, even though I'd done all the logical reasoning in my head. You've pulled 350, you've had 200 kilos in one hand. Yes, you did black out, but nonetheless, you've got it in you. You'd done the full weight for a triple on the pins. Everybody online, everybody's saying the pins are way harder than the rocks, but it's hard to understand why. So when I was there chalking the rings, strange thing to say, chalking rings up. Oh dear. I've said that in a public forum. Nonetheless, we'll move on. I just started to think, what if these don't go up? Because it's not like a powerlifting competition where you go and give your best on the day and leave with X numbers. They go or they do not.
Yeah.
And we walked away 184th. I was 184th person to lift them. You were the 186th person to lift them. Yeah. And it's a very small pool of people worldwide that's managed to.
That's a very small number. Yeah.
The adrenaline buzz was huge, wasn't it? There were 11 people there, I think. So it was us.
I came away absolutely. I still am super stoked. And I was boasting a bit for obvious reasons afterwards, wasn't it? I think being the age I am and the weight I am, you can play with those stats, the whole pound for pound. I don't think there is such a thing as Wilks on things like the Dinnie Stones, but having got them up at my age with my, I'm not a strong man and all that kind of stuff actually put me quite high up in the stats. So chatting to Brett and things, we're able to kind of look at it afterwards and go, it's not just what you wanted, it's more than really. And it's, we were both more than successful on the day. And it was an experience and a half. I think we both still are. Hence this podcast, really, both still very excited about the what we've achieved and what the thrill of it was years in the making, really.
The bottom line for me is it's another example of using fitness in a way outside of the four walls of a gym. It's applying fitness to things that are unique, things that are fun,
things
that are challenging, things that have heritage to them. We got to do it in a kilt. Sick.
I was just about to say that. It was a big road trip. We're up with Campbell as well in the truck. We go all the way up there in Aberdeenshire, which we made some jokes. Aberdeenshire is absolutely stunning. It's
beautiful. It is. It's lovely.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah,
we
it's
had
incredible.
A beautiful day for it. We met some lovely people. We got our kilts on, and we did something extra Scottish.
And all 4 people were successful.
All 4 people
I think we need to nod
yeah.
to Ollie, don't we? Who on his first 2 attempts had his positioning all wrong because he hadn't had access to pins.
What an exciting journey that was! Yeah.
So Ollie had come up from Southampton, amazing, and he'd done a 300 kilo Jefferson lift off blocks in the gym, and he had the big stone at the back and the smaller stone at the front. Basically, based on the advice of people around him. Again, this is where the sort of confidence thing and the leverage points that you can apply logic to it, but it all really depends on how you are built and how you move and where you're strong. So his first 2 attempts, the first one didn't move, a lot of tension, didn't go anywhere. Second one, it started to move, but you could just see that torso twist that you were getting in training, and you could see. I'm sure he won't mind me saying this because he was buzzing, and we were very vocal about how amazing it was to see. But you could see he was a bit despondent and a bit really gutted in his eyes about the fact that he'd come all this way.
Yeah, he thought he was done, didn't he?
He thought he was done. And then changed the stones around, changed position around. Did he lift them the way that we did?
He did, yeah.
Yeah.
So it was his lifting that had thrown me off, and then in the end, we were right to do it, or that was the most likely way they were going to come up. And it was a case of that very last lift. I think it was actually me that said to him, "Why don't you just try and turn around and at least feel them the other way?" And he turned around and gave him a kind of a tension.
The second.
And he went, "Oh God, right, I'm doing it this way." And they came up really well, didn't they?
Yeah, really well. So the buzz. I was saying the buzz in the room. It wasn't the room. It was.
Everybody was super stoked. People were jumping off the ground and squealing with delight and all that. Because we knew, I think everybody knew if he tried again the way he was trying, which felt like the way he wanted to try, and it did to him as well, that it wasn't going to happen for him today. And it was a big long journey, and everybody else had been successful and all that kind of stuff. So to see him,
mega.
we got as much of a thrill out of that as our own lifts.
But it was the icing on the cake of a very, very enjoyable, successful day, and not the day I expected, because the people there were lovely. Having Brett tell us all these silly stories about people from all over the world that come, and it was just fantastic. And I'm still buzzing because it's so unique, and that's what's fun about it. It's not going to the gym again, chalking up a bloody £500 Texas deadlift bar with perfect knurling for this, that, and the other, and all the stuff that we're used to, and all the luxuries that I myself, I'm not going to lift without a power bar. Don't be silly. Like all these things, it just put us out our comfort zone in a really unique way. And as we're both from Scotland, I may not sound it, it had that real heritage overtone to it. Getting to do it in a kilt, just a bit of fun, and it was a really fun narrative to play out on social media, share with people, and have them come along for the journey. So we hope that has not been too much of a ramble and has in fact been what we intended it to be, which has been a bit of a debrief of the Dinnie Stones. If you ever want to give them a go yourself, please do reach out to us for a little bit more advice if it hasn't already been covered in this podcast. And if you were interested in one-to-one coaching, whilst this is a podcast, we are also a coaching company. So please do reach out for us in that capacity as well.
We remained hybrid throughout.
We didn't.
We're able to run some Monroes at full pelt a couple of weeks earlier. So it's...
Yeah. Funnily enough, I don't feel like, maybe it's just adaptation, but I don't feel like my triathlon volume increasing got in the way of the Dinnie Stones as much as it would deadlifting. So that probably speaks to the lower back weakness that I have.
Something to do with range or whatever.
It's just interesting because a lot of time spent in aero position normally makes my deadlifts on Mondays and my squats on Mondays feel terrible. But the Dinnies remain decent throughout. So again, unique leverages, unique challenges. That's why this was so fun. You were blasting about Monroes pretty much every weekend throughout, weren't you? Because you don't have the demand of the additional bike volume where things where things begin to get, or baguette. I'm going to run with it. Oh no, baguette is a word for bread in French. So this is, I've not made a word up there.
Hungry, are we?
I'm hungry, yeah. So begin to get antisocial because you spend so long on the bike. But nonetheless, that is episode number 4 of the OMNIA Performance Podcast. Do all of the things on whatever platform you're listening on. To summarize, thank you again for listening, and we will see you in episode number 5.